Sophie Miller was having a perfectly normal day. Or at least, she thought she was. She'd woken up, spilled coffee on her favorite cardigan, argued with her pet hamster, particularly surly little creature named Sir Winston, and was about to run out the door to her boring job at the pet store when, well, everything went haywire. The moment Sophie stepped outside, her toe caught the edge of the doorstep, sending her face first into a puddle of rainwater. As if on cue, her grocery bag split open, sending a collection of slightly squashed tomatoes rolling across the sidewalk. "Great, just great," she muttered, shaking her head in frustration. "I should have just stayed in bed today." She attempted to salvage the situation, fumbling with a jar of pickles as she dashed across the street to catch the bus. Only, the bus didn't come. Instead, a shadow fell over her, a large, perfectly circular shadow. Sophie paused mid-step and looked up. At first, she thought it was just a blimp. Or maybe a drone. Maybe even some kind of weird government surveillance thing she hadn't been briefed on yet. But no. This was not a blimp. It was a UFO. And it was descending straight toward her. Sophie squinted, adjusting her glasses in disbelief. She could hear her heartbeat thumping in her ears as the spaceship, gleaming with silver light, hovered a few feet above the ground. Its sleek, smooth surface reflected the early morning sun, making it look like a giant metallic frisbee. As the ship landed softly on the pavement, the door slid open with a whoosh. A figure stepped out. No, not just a figure, an alien. A tall, thin creature with iridescent skin, 3 eyes, one in the middle of its forehead, and limbs that seemed to bend in ways that were not remotely natural. Sophie's first instinct? Not to scream. Not to run. Not even to faint, though that was probably coming later. No. She stood there, hands on her hips, and shouted, "You've got to be kidding me. This is what's going to ruin my day. Are you lost, or are you just trying to mess with me?" The alien blinked slowly, then, this is the part that Sophie would always remember with a mix of horror and disbelief, it smiled at her. A big, creepy, toothy grin. Well, the alien drawled in perfect, if slightly southern, English. "What have we here? A fine specimen. A prime candidate, I'd say. Don't worry, darlin', we've been keeping our eyes on you." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "What? You've been spying on me? I'm not some kind of Amazon Prime package. You've got the wrong woman, buddy. I'm not even remotely in the market for a new, whatever you are." The alien tilted its head and seemed to consider this for a moment before replying, "Oh, but you are, my dear. You're exactly the one we need." Sophie opened her mouth to protest further, but before she could form a word, the alien flicked a wrist and, zap. She was suddenly inside the spaceship, sitting in an oddly plush chair. The door shut with a hiss, and the ship shot upward into the sky. Sophie blinked, her eyes taking in her surroundings. The interior of the spaceship was like something out of a 1960s sci-fi movie: metallic walls, pulsing lights, and far too many weird screens displaying data she couldn't even begin to understand. She glanced around. There was no one else in sight. She was alone, in a strange room, probably halfway to the moon by now. This wasn't a dream. This was really happening. Okay, Sophie said, forcing herself to breathe. "This is fine. Totally normal. I mean, I always suspected I'd get abducted by aliens at some point. It's been on my bucket list, really." A soft chime interrupted her self-soothing, and a smooth, robotic voice came over the intercom. "Welcome aboard, Sophie Miller. You are currently in the custody of the Zornathian Expansion Guild, and you have been selected for a very special purpose." "Custody?" Sophie scoffed. "Really? You've got to be kidding me. I don't even know what Zornathian means. I'm not some kind of intergalactic experiment. I don't even have the right genes. And for the record, I'm pretty sure I'm allergic to whatever you're putting in the air right now." The robotic voice paused for a moment before replying, "You are perfect for the role we have in mind. You, Sophie Miller, are uniquely qualified to carry out your purpose. You have been chosen." Sophie furrowed her brow. Chosen for what? To be some kind of weird alien pet? Because let me tell you, I am so not into that. "Oh, you'll see," the voice replied. "Don't worry. You're going to be very popular." A second later, the door to her room opened with a soft whoosh. A sleek, humanoid figure entered. This one had an oddly regal look, tall, with long flowing hair and a skin tone that reminded Sophie of polished marble. But it wasn't the figure's appearance that made Sophie's stomach flip. It was the fact that the being's eyes were fixed firmly on her, as if Sophie were the most interesting thing it had seen in centuries. "Hello, Sophie," the figure said in a smooth, hypnotic voice. "I am Zarathos, First High Lord of the Zornathian Guild. I have come to explain your purpose." Sophie stood up quickly, knocking the chair over in her haste. "Wait a minute. Hold on. Am I being sold to space royalty or something?" Zarathos chuckled. "Not quite. You have been chosen for a much more important role." The alien then went on to explain that Sophie, with her rare genetic markers, was perfect for a breeding program designed to improve the genetic stock of the Zornathian race. The aliens had been observing Earth for a while and had identified Sophie as the ideal candidate. Sophie felt like the ground had dropped out beneath her. "Wait a second. Are you telling me I'm some kind of galactic breeder?" she sputtered. "No, no, no. Absolutely not. I don't care how good my genes are, there is no way I'm going to be some alien baby machine." Zarathos didn't seem fazed by her outrage. "Oh, but you are, Sophie Miller. Your genes are exactly what we need to enhance our race. And you will be most appreciated for your contribution." Sophie's mind was racing. "No, no, no. I didn't sign up for this. You can't just take me. This isn't a freakin' breeding farm." Zarathos smiled. "You don't need to worry. You will be treated with the utmost care, and you'll be revered throughout the galaxy. You'll be a hero." Sophie was about to throw her pickles at him when the voice of the ship's AI interrupted her thoughts. "Please do not resist," it said. "The Zornathian Guild will ensure your comfort. You are part of something much greater than yourself." "Well, I don't care what you think. I'm not going down without a fight." Sophie crossed her arms, already planning her next move. She would find a way out of this. She had to. Sophie spent the next few days on the spaceship, if you could call it that, locked in a luxurious, yet sterile room. There were no windows, but a constant, soft hum emanated from the walls, suggesting some sort of engine running. Every time she tried to make sense of her new life, the absurdity of it all made her laugh, or maybe that was her way of keeping from crying. The food was strange but edible, and she was given luxurious clothes and endless amenities. There were no windows, but somehow she could see the vast expanse of space outside, her perspective shifting as the ship glided through the stars. Sophie had every intention of making an escape. The problem was, she didn't know how. And even worse, she had no idea who to trust. The other women, there were a few she'd met, seemed to be under some kind of spell. They didn't resist, they didn't fight back. Some of them were even oddly excited about the idea of being part of the breeding program. Sophie, on the other hand, was furious. And she had a plan. She began to notice strange things, small shifts in her surroundings. The way she could focus on certain objects and move them ever so slightly. At first, she thought she was imagining it, but then it happened again. She could move things with her mind. Psychic abilities. And the more she practiced, the more she realized, she wasn't just a passive participant in this mess. She was a weapon. Sophie couldn't believe it at first, the way her thoughts seemed to bend reality. She discovered her psychic ability by accident, One of those moments when your mind is so fed up with your situation that it's almost like you tap into something deeper, something primal. She was sitting at her desk in her room, feeling the walls close in, when she just thought, about the glass of water on the other side of the table, and it moved, not much, just a little wobble. Enough to make her blink and think, did that really just happen? She immediately stood up, trying to focus harder, and this time, the glass tipped over, spilling water all over the table. She grabbed a towel, wiping the mess, but deep down, she knew something had shifted. Something had changed. She wasn't just a helpless pawn anymore. Sophie spent the next few days experimenting, quietly, when no one was watching. Every time she concentrated, it worked. She could nudge objects, move things across the table, even influence the air vents to create a breeze or shut them off entirely. But it wasn't just about moving things, it was the feeling, the rush of power that came with it. There was something inside her that had been waiting to be unleashed. She had to learn how to control it, and learn she did. The ship was full of distractions, aliens watching her every move, cameras everywhere, but Sophie had always been a quick study. When Zarathos visited her again, trying to explain how she'd be revered as part of the breeding program, Sophie barely listened. She could feel her ability growing stronger with every passing day. She wasn't going to be anyone's genetic experiment. No. She'd find a way out, even if she had to bring the whole damn ship down. The moment she figured out how to hide her new powers was when things really started to change. One afternoon, she sat across from Zarathos during one of his comfort talks, where he tried to convince her that this was a privilege. Sophie, of course, wasn't buying it. He was in mid-sentence when Sophie suddenly felt a rush of energy, and without warning, the entire room's lighting flickered. Zarathos didn't notice right away, but Sophie could feel the ship's systems glitching. It was a small step. But it was a step in the right direction. Sophie began using her abilities more actively. Little things at first, flickering lights, turning off the ship's annoying background music, making the AI glitch for a second, but as she practiced, she realized the power she had wasn't just physical. It was mental. She could push thoughts into people's minds. She could send tiny suggestions, like whispers, into the ears of the crew members that came by her room. She'd make them forget about her for a few minutes, or convince them to leave her alone for the day. It was like having control over her environment without lifting a finger, but it wasn't enough. Sophie wasn't going to be a passive prisoner for the rest of her life. One night, while lying awake in her bed, her mind racing, Sophie realized that she had to find out more. She had to understand exactly what she was up against. What kind of ship was this? Who was in charge? And most importantly, what did Zarathos really want from her? The next morning, when Zarathos arrived for one of his regular visits, Sophie was ready. She had a plan, an idea so simple it was almost laughable. All she had to do was get the information she needed. Zarathos, she said, standing up as soon as he walked into the room. I've been thinking about your offer. About my role here. He raised an eyebrow, clearly pleased by her sudden interest. I'm glad to hear you've come around. Yeah, well, Sophie waved her hand dismissively. I'm wondering about the whole breeding thing. I mean, I get that you need my special abilities for something. She grinned, the words dripping with sarcasm. But why me? You could have picked anyone, right? Why did you choose this particular Earthling? Zarathos' expression faltered for just a moment, though Sophie wasn't sure he'd even realized he'd done it. Your genetic makeup is unique, he explained smoothly. Your latent psychic abilities are what make you particularly useful to us. The Zornathian Guild thrives on genetic diversity. We need your kind to continue our evolutionary cycle. Your species' brainpower, combined with our physical advancements, will result in superior offspring. Strong, intelligent beings. It's a process that benefits everyone. Sophie had to suppress a laugh. Superior offspring? What was this, some kind of galactic reality show? So I'm basically a breeding machine, huh? Sophie crossed her arms, a challenge in her voice. I'm just here to help you guys get stronger and smarter while you sit back and wait for the next generation of superspecies. Zarathos gave her a look of cold amusement. That's one way to put it, yes. Sophie wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Well, I've got a little news for you, buddy. I'm not your breeding farm. And I'm definitely not just some submissive tool for your galactic plans. She stared him down, feeling the power rising inside her. It felt like electricity coursing through her veins. She could feel it in her fingertips, buzzing like a live wire. Zarathos smirked. You think you can escape? You think you can stop this? I know I can, Sophie said, her voice low but filled with determination. And I'm not gonna wait around for you to make me your pawn. I've got my own plans now. You're not the only one with power, Zarathos. Zarathos' expression turned from amused to a little more serious. He narrowed his eyes, taking a step closer. You think you can outsmart the guild? You think you can control us? Sophie grinned. Let's find out. As soon as he stepped within range, Sophie felt a sudden rush of energy. She concentrated, focusing on the space between them, and just like that, the chair near the desk shot out from under the table, colliding with Zarathos and knocking him off balance. He stumbled backward, surprised, but Sophie didn't let up. She focused again, pushing harder this time, and a wave of telekinetic force slammed into him, sending him crashing into the wall. Zarathos grunted, his eyes flashing with fury. You will regret this, Sophie Miller, he snarled, but there was something else in his voice, a recognition of her potential. Sophie stepped forward, every part of her burning with energy. She wasn't going to be anyone's puppet. Not now. Not ever. She was in control now. Over the next few days, Sophie put her new powers to use. It wasn't just about resisting Zarathos anymore, it was about taking control of her destiny. The ship was full of systems she could manipulate, cameras she could jam, and security forces she could avoid. With each passing hour, Sophie became more adept at controlling her psychic powers, gaining confidence with every small victory. And while the alien ship's inhabitants seemed blissfully unaware of her growing rebellion, Sophie knew that she had the upper hand. She spent hours strategizing, planning her escape. She wasn't just going to flee, though. No, she had something bigger in mind. It took time, but Sophie eventually managed to break into the ship's central control room. It was heavily guarded, but Sophie had learned how to avoid detection. She used her telepathic abilities to manipulate the minds of the guards, sending them off in different directions, and then slipped inside. The control room was full of blinking lights, complicated screens, and a series of alien consoles that looked as if they belonged to a species far beyond Earth's technological capabilities. But Sophie wasn't intimidated. She was determined. With a deep breath, she tapped into the power within her, focusing all her psychic energy on the ship's systems. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the lights flickered. The air felt thick, like the whole ship was holding its breath. Then, with a final push, Sophie broke the system. The alarms began to blare. The ship's AI screamed in protest, but Sophie's grin was wide, triumphant. The entire ship was in chaos. She could feel it. The energy from the control room was pulsing through her, coursing into every corner of the ship. She had them right where she wanted them. It was time to take down the Zornathian Guild. And Sophie Miller was going to be the one to do it. The battle that followed was chaotic, unpredictable, and nothing like Sophie had imagined. But in the end, it was her victory. The ship's AI was disabled, the guards neutralized, and the Zornathian Guild's grip over her world was broken. Sophie stood at the ship's helm, looking out at the stars. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She wasn't just a tool for some alien race's plan. She was free, and she was going to change everything. End of story.